This
record this session,
conference will
so
now be recorded.
we'll have this up for records and probably post to the RFP site. So appreciate everybody's time this morning to sign in and learn a little bit more about the request for proposals we have with regards to Old Tampa Bay Assimilative Capacity Assessment. Our goal is basically just to provide additional information or answer any questions that you might have with regards to the RFP. We'll give a little bit of context and background on why we're doing this project, and I'll kick that off and kind of give that background, and then I'll turn it over to Maya, and she'll talk specifically about the RFP details, and then we'll open the floor and see if you guys had any further questions that we didn't address. So without further ado, I'll probably jump right into it and just give you that really broad overview of why we're doing this work in Old Tampa Bay. And it's basically something not new that we've been working on. This we have a long history of trying to tackle nutrient related issues in the bay as it pertains to protecting seagrasses. So there's been various management paradigms developed. There's been nutrient loads that have been assigned to the bay that have now become federally recognized TMDLs. And as of late, we've been maintaining a reasonable assurance determination through the FDEP that the management plan we have dealing with those nutrient loads to the bay will be adequate to support water quality for the benefit of seagrasses. And we've been on this road going all the way back to the mid 1990s. So a lot of the management paradigms that we've developed in the past have been coming to fruition for much of the bay, but the exception has been the Old Tampa Bay segment. So we continue to struggle with meeting numeric nutrient criteria related to chlorophyll A in that bay segment, while also maintaining the nutrient loads that we've established that were determined to be protective of the bay back in the 1990s. So that disconnect is what's driving our current request for proposal of trying to understand what is the synergistic mechanisms that are um, influencing the bay's water quality and the current conditions that we're now observing as it relates to seagrass. So this graphic basically is indicating our water quality assessments that we've been doing annually. On the right, that color-coded red, yellow, green stoplight graphic. And this relates to chlorophyll A conditions and water clarity conditions. And for the most part, we've seen improvements from both those parameters throughout Tampa Bay. And the exception has been Old Tampa Bay. And that has come more to light as of recently because of a significant drop in seagrass coverage from the 2016 period. We've lost a little over, I think, 6,500 acres of seagrass, and that's been driving much of the bay-wide loss of seagrasses in the Tampa Bay region. And we know that nutrients are one component, but there are other issues that we're facing in Old Tampa Bay that also could be complementary to getting the bay back on track. So this RFP is focused on looking at those strategies moving forward and assessing whether or not the planned work that we do have on the books and that we know that our partners are trying to implement, particularly over the next 5 to 10 years, whether or not that is going to be sufficient to reverse this course and get seagrasses back in the Old Tampa Bay segment. So that's a little bit of the background and context of why we put this RFP out in the street. The slide I showed previously, there's a lot of links back to these old documents and sort of management documents that we've been building on over the years. And these are useful information to kind of look back on in responding to the RFP. So I wanted to encourage you all to take a deep dive into our library and also, if those are if there's questions about any of the data sources, I think we've tried to address those in some of the questions we received so far. So there is a document now posted on the RFP website that is addressing some of those questions and linking to more of this background information as well. So I'll stop there, and Maya, I think, is going to dive a little bit deeper into the RFP we put out on the street and some of the questions we received so far. And then again, we'll open it up for any further questions. Let me put these slides now.
Sorry, Ed, I took over controls. Is that all right? And I'm
Yep, you're
sharing.
good.
Okay. So this is a re-advertisement of an RFP that was initially advertised in the early summer periods, primarily from late June until late July. In response to the original request for proposals, we received one respondent, and that was evaluated by a review committee, and we presented the findings of that review committee to our management and policy boards, who are the decision makers for our program. Based on the findings and direction of both the review committee and our policy board, we re-advertised this request for proposals with several changes. In addition to extending the period of accepting proposals, we revised the budget from a maximum of $260,000 to a maximum of $320,000. And we also revised some of the task descriptions to be more clear with the expectations and desires of both the Tampa Bay Estuary Program and the Tampa Bay Nitrogen Management Consortium, which is a collaborative that we convene. Those revisions and clarifications to the request for proposal primarily centered around being clear that we are looking for work that is not merely a continuation of the existing management paradigm and activities that we have been collaboratively working on for the better part of 30 years as a region, but instead we're looking at how those existing paradigms could be, modified, or new approaches to better understanding the ecological expression of nutrient pollution to the Old Tampa Bay segment. So I have up here, hopefully you all have reviewed the website, the webpage on the Tampa Bay Estuary Program website. You can view the RFP details, and we have posted the responses to the questions. As a high-level summary, let me blow this up for you guys a little bit because it looks like that might be hard to see. As a high-level summary, there are several tasks that we're looking for, but we are open to proposed deviations. We are encouraging teams to be creative in their approaches to tackling these challenges. So we've described what we think the scope of activities that we think would meet our needs, but we are open to alternatives. The most important part of your proposal is going to be how you describe the scope of work and the actions that you think are necessary. So we don't expect to see a direct restatement of the scope of work we've put out here. This is a guide, and we expect you as proposers to develop these thoughts more completely and identify how you would recommend addressing these major tasks. So the first task, we want to evaluate the existing management paradigm and propose alternatives. Again, we're trying to emphasize that we don't just want a continuation of the existing management paradigm. We're looking for either changes, modifications to that existing paradigm, or a new paradigm altogether for the Old Tampa Bay segment. We're also, the next task that we're looking for is to look at those targets, those indicator targets. So currently, Tampa Bay, the management paradigm is looking at a eutrophication target related to chlorophyll A, but based on the conditions that we've seen in Old Tampa Bay, it's possible that a different target for a different indicator of eutrophication may be appropriate. And so we're looking for potential adjustments to the existing thresholds and targets that we have in place, or alternative approaches altogether. And at the Tampa Bay Estuary Program and the Tampa Bay Nitrogen Management Consortium, we're very much focused on research that is actionable. So we don't just want to describe the problem or an approach to addressing the problem. We want to delve deeply into what actions resource managers can take to take the knowledge that has been gleaned from those first two tasks and make a demonstrable difference in the the ecological condition of Old Tampa Bay. So this would be looking at both those planned and potential management interventions that could be used to enhance water quality and environmental conditions in Old Tampa Bay. So getting a handle on what our partners may already have planned, or what types of actions would be needed to produce the kinds of outcomes that we're looking for, consistent with the reasonable assurance plan for Tampa Bay. And then we understand that climate change might be altering the assimilative capacity of the Old Tampa Bay segment. You know, we set a total maximum daily load, or total allowable amount of nitrogen pollution for the Old Tampa Bay segment. But if the work conducted in the first 3 tasks of this proposal shows that while we're currently meeting that nitrogen load target, but we're not seeing the outcomes we want, if we need to adjust that overall nutrient diet for Old Tampa Bay, we recognize that additional changes to the allocations that are assigned to all of the entities that have a nitrogen load that drains to Old Tampa Bay will need to be addressed. And so this task is focused on evaluating whether or not the current nitrogen load diet is correct, given what we know about the Bay's response and the planned activities of the partners, and can conceptually come up with a way, if needed, to reallocate the appropriate nitrogen load to that Bay segment. And the Nitrogen Management Consortium is a collaborative, consensus-based body, so there will be considerable amount of coordination, both with staff from the Tampa Bay Estuary Program, as well as the Nitrogen Management Consortium participants and the co-chairs. So we want to make sure that any proposal received in response to this request for proposals will be programming in adequate time and services associated with facilitation, coordination, and overall contract management. So that's a high-level review of the tasks that we're looking for and the approaches that we're hoping for. Our board has been very clear that this work needs to represent the new direction, the next steps for the next 20 years of Bay management. Our review committee and all of our partners recognize that Tampa Bay sets a high standard for how we manage nutrient pollution, not just here locally in the Tampa Bay region, but statewide. And so the work that is described in this request for proposals is meant to serve not only as tackling these new challenges that we're seeing here in Tampa Bay, but as a potential model statewide. And our boards have been very clear that they are hoping to elicit a lot of interest and competitive proposals for this work. One final change that I want to call your attention to is because we have had such a long history of successful management of Tampa Bay and Old Tampa Bay as well, there was direction from our boards and from the initial review committee to build in a independent subject matter expert peer review process that considers both existing expertise in the management of Tampa Bay and nutrient pollution, as well as novel expertise on different modeling approaches or expertise on the confounding effects of climate change on nutrient management paradigms. And so the successful respondent will also be expected to collaborate transparently with that independent subject matter expert peer review panel, which will be selected and managed by the Tampa Bay Estuary Program independently of this funding opportunity here. So just wanted to make you all aware of that distinction as well. And as Ed mentioned, we received almost 25 questions in response to the initial request for proposals. So all of those questions have been collated and answered on this document here, which you can get to from the Tampa Bay Estuary Program website. I'm not going to go over each of these. You can review those yourselves, but we wanted to provide ample opportunity for you all to ask your own questions or seek additional clarification on those answers that have already been provided, or outstanding questions that you might have about the request for proposals. So with that, I'd like to open it up for any kinds of comments or questions that you all might have. What you got, Ping?
Uh, Actually, I did a little bit of homework. I read some of your reports and everything, and I kind of like the figure one in your RFP. I'm focusing on the yellow area. My question is, so I initially started with, oh, maybe we need to have a circulation model. Then I read at paper. Actually, there's a very good circulation model and coupled with a whole bunch of things. My take on this is, has anybody done anything on the wave forcing, like the resuspension? If I'm still working on the reports, right? So the nutrient input, is it mostly from discharges from the creek at the Tarpon Lake and so on and so forth, or has anybody looked at the resuspension contribution of resuspension into the nutrient load? Or is resuspension a big contributor, or has that been looked at all?
You may answer that, Maya.
Sure.
Yeah, so there had been prior studies on the contribution of resuspension. I think Scholhammer was one of the earlier researchers from USGS, and that
Mhm.
information was integrated into that old Tampa Bay ecosystem model that was developed. So there is a
Mhm.
hydrodynamic component that's looking at resuspension. I think where there's existing data gaps as well as knowledge is the contribution of internal loadings to the overall eutrophication issues that we're now facing in the bay, and that there's a limited amount of data that could be used to understand nutrient fluxes, but that's a significant gap.
Yeah, so I guess I'm leading to my real question: is wave induced or resuspension and a significant factor, or a significant interest you guys have? That, because I don't see, for me, like, I don't see anything I can add to the circulation model. It's very good, and my knowledge on ecological link is quite limited. However, what I can add would be the wave induced resuspension, particularly at the west corner, where I'm having your reports opened up, and that
Yeah.
paper you guys have on that knowledge, failing knowledge gap to enhance recovery. I can't even pronounce that. Pyrodinum Bohemianus boom or whatever. So that figure, you showed figure one in your presentation. If you look at the figure two, the concentration, it's suspicious that that concentration figure is not really driven by flow, because the that west side of the bay is open to relatively wide wind fetch, and so the wind driven. Well, I know the model include the wind forcing. However, it depends on how the wind forcing is incorporated. If wind forcing incorporated in drive the depth average velocity, it's kind of, how do I put this, it's kind of minimal, because the wind is mostly unless it's include the wind wave generation, and which is actually not very well understood, but it's so easy to measure.
There's certainly seasonal wind events, particularly our winter squalls, that could be a contributing
Hmm.
factor for
Yeah.
seagrass recovery, like influencing seagrass recovery. And I
Hmm.
can't say that any of the past modeling efforts has looked at that in particular, especially during the contemporary period. But that certainly could be a factor for some of the areas where we've lost a significant amount of seagrass and that coverage isn't there. That could be a sort of an additional stress that has to be overcome to restore those habitats again. So that
Hmm.
would be something,
Yeah.
to consider in an application.
Oh, okay. Yeah, so that's like my next question. If indeed wind forcing and the wave, the physical process of wave have some influence on seagrass, then that is like a easier to treat, I guess, issue like all these artificial reefs, oyster reefs, and we can manipulate wave much easier than trying to open up the causeway and for the flow. So and basically to add to Maya's comments earlier about uh, uh, a next approach, like different alternative. I look at your 10 alternatives, 9 is a good one, but if wave forcing proved to be a significant contribution to resuspend sediment to reload the nutrient from the bottom, and then an alternative maybe is just to kind of remove some of the heavily uh, uh, polluted bed sediment, which I don't know. I imagine it'd be easier than opening up the causeway or whatever. Well, my observation is the flow usually are very slow, and it's definitely not enough to pick up stuff on the bottom, right? The stuff get picked up on the bottom has to be wave, and I think, and we can do measurement to verify that.
The other thing to point you to, Ping, is there was prior work done by Mark Fonseca looking
I
at
would,
sort of
yeah,
wave energy impacts on some of the shoals within Tampa
yeah,
Bay.
yeah,
And one of the strategies that came out of that is trying to restore some of the longshore bars um,
yep, yeah. I
that
did.
are adjacent to these shoal areas. So, that there's some background information on it, but
Yeah,
it's
I
been
read.
quite
I
some
read.
time we kind of revisited those effects specifically in Old Tampa Bay.
I read his Longshore Bar paper and stuff, some of the survey data, but I must be, if I be a little critical, so the 1930s area photo tends to get overexposed. Sometimes for me to look at the beach, the 1930s photo tends to give me the widest beach. And the Longshore Bar is interesting. Yeah, that would be. I mean, the restoration of the bar, well, all the bar formation or erosion of the bar would again be forced by wave. So I'm just, I wonder if that is something uh, that can add to the existing knowledge.
Yeah, like I said, it's been part of the conversation, but it hasn't been looked at
Okay.
specifically in the contemporary period lately.
Oh, wonderful. Yeah. So that would be in the direction I would like to take. So I just started the literature review, and I will definitely. I got all your papers on the photo you have there. I read the first few. I read first you guys' paper first, so I can ask my questions now. But I
Been
will
busy.
read more stuff. Okay. Another question. Actually, I have never got any a project through the University of the Tampa Bay Estuary. So, what is the overhead? Do we have a special deal with USF so we have lower overhead? And then if I get the money, I get to keep most of the money instead of the university took half of it. What is the overhead? You guys have
I've had my
We did not specify an overhead rate in this RFP like we do with other requests for proposals like the Tampa Bay Environmental Restoration Fund, which caps overhead at 10%. Our typical agreement with USF is to recognize us as a state agency and
okay.
have
Yeah,
overhead
yeah.
around 25%.
Good.
So
Okay.
a little bit less than what you're used to for
Yes,
other grants.
yes. So, yeah. Well, to me, that's important, right? That's how much they take, and I have no idea what they do with the money, and then how much I keep. The more I keep, the better. If okay, well, thanks.
Yeah.
yeah.
Ed and Maya, I have a non-scientific question, more of a logistical question for the proposal. You had responded that the 50 pages was the total for the whole proposal package. I guess my question is in regards to page 3 of the proposal, item C.D, where it says submit an affirmative action plan. We are still trying to run down our affirmative action plan, one of our HR folks, and we're not sure how big it is just yet, being a fairly large company. So is it okay if we provide a link to the plan as opposed to putting in the whole plan, which could be in excess of 50 pages?
Yeah, I think all
Sure.
we're looking for there is that referencing that you actually have a plan in place.
Gotcha.
If you
Thank
So,
you.
summarize what that plan, you know, is eliciting in your organization in the available space you have, other than what you've already provided, then we'd encourage you to do that. But recognize that these plans are probably going to supersede the 50-page limit.
yeah,
Right,
so
right.
there are 3 key pieces of information we ask you to summarize. We want you to provide broad overall employment statistics at your company, including the number of employees and minorities that are employed, whether or not you have an affirmative action plan or a plan to increase minority employment, and then whether or not you're a minority or women-owned business enterprise. So you can provide a link to that plan, but we don't need to see the whole thing in the package.
Good to know. Thank you.
Mhm.
I have one more question.
Okay.
So, you know, the angle I would take probably I would need to buy lots of equipment, particularly so the wind wave generation there there are models, but none of it actually works very good, and that would be field measurement. It'll be very easy to do field measurement over there. So so equipment is allowed, right? I always want to buy equipment, by the way. Equipment is allowed, like a turbidity sensor, turbidity sensor, and wave gauges, mostly turbidity sensor and wave gauges. So that would help us to gauge the resuspension event, and hopefully, hopefully, you know, my goal is, you know, if we can include the resuspension into the existing model, the wave stir, and not the current. So if we get the wave stir, the wave induced resuspension into the existing model, and I wonder if that would be a good improvement, or a new contribution.
I think in a response, if the equipment is necessary to produce the deliverables into the tasks, then we would frame it that way in the agreement.
Okay, so equipment is no problem, right?
Equipment is not prohibited, so it is allowable. But I guess also add that I think that the work that we've primarily contemplated is more related to the analysis of some of the existing data and maybe an identification of deficiencies in data and for like areas for future research. That's more how we conceptualize and have described the work, but equipment purchases are not precluded. They are allowable.
Yeah. Well, I'm not talking about a large amount. If a few thousand for the gauges and the turbidity sensor, and okay,
Understood.
thanks.
Any other questions? This is your time.
Hey, I have a question related to the last. Are there any instruments or sensors or anything that TBEP already owns that could be deployed as part of this project, and then that doesn't eat into the proposed budget?
We currently have 8 hobo temperature loggers, and they're being deployed for additional information on temperature trends in the shallow areas of Old Tampa Bay. So those could be redeployed. We have also jointly purchased a wave sensor array with Pinellas County and the USF Center for Maritime and Port Studies that could be deployed and used in this context. We have some really basic, basic cheap things, but like Secudiscs and refractometers. But is there anything else, Ed, that you can think of that we own, or is that it?
Not that would probably benefit this study.
Yeah.
Yeah, but the shallow water ones, I work at a university, but those are not really expensive. But the budget is, to me, is like a lot of money. Maybe not to undermine the consultants. To me, it's a lot of money for 1 year, right? So, I'm thinking about 20, 30,000 for equipment that's only 10%, and also, yeah. So, okay.
We hear you. We hear you. There's also a sizable element of human interaction, which
Yeah,
introduces complexity.
yeah,
And we recognize that that requires expertise, time, energy, and we value that aspect of the work deeply, which is part of why that we are advertising at the cost that we are. And we also understand there's a considerable amount of data analysis and synthesis that would be required to conceptualize a modified or new paradigm. But there's certainly room and capacity for some of these additional assessments like you're describing and associated equipment needs.
And to that point, framing a proposal to be accomplished within 1 year, that is our time frame that we're looking at, and that's where we want to try to deliver the outcomes to DEP by the early part of 2025, the latest. So keep that in mind as well as you draft a proposal.
yeah. I do plan to work with other people, Maya. And yeah, that's just the one technical aspect, and the rest I'm trying to find people. I don't know if I should even ask this. If you guys have partners that you suggest we partner with, I'd be happy to do that.
I don't know that it's appropriate for us to play matchmaker, but I will say we certainly strongly encourage collaborative interdisciplinary teams,
Yep.
teams that are able to bring in expertise from academia, the private sector, those with long existing standing knowledge of the work of the Tampa Bay Estuary Program and the Tampa Bay Nitrogen Management Consortium,
Yeah.
those with novel understanding of some of the climate change stressors and challenges that we're facing would represent a very strong and competitive team from the perspective of the estuary program and our review committee's findings.
Understood.
And all of the contact information for folks here today will also be made available. So if you want to match make amongst yourselves, we can provide those data to you as well.
Oh, can I ask one last question? So the final product, right? So some of so does the final product involve? Well, I guess the action plan. What I might understand if action plan would involve. So if I partner up with some a company out there, there's good at solving problems, finding problems, and giving data, and so that encouraged. To be blunt, as also Eli and Brian Cook's company, and talked with me, see if we are interested in partner up, and so that's kind of my question. If we, at the end of the day, we want to develop something that is actually feasible, and people from the university can think of. Sometimes I call it la la land solutions that may not work at all, but partner up with some practical practitioners may help.
We conceptualize several deliverables and outcomes under each task. But
Yeah.
ultimately, task 3 and 4 are those actionable components that Maya is referencing that could interface with the Nitrogen Management Consortium and those charged with nutrient load discharges in the bay, as well as other entities that might be able to implement complementary interventions that would have a benefit for the bay's ecology.
Yeah, and those first two tasks are focused more on the philosophy of how we manage the bay, you know? Other questions or comments, discussion that would be useful for you all? Well, if you all have no other questions, proposals are due October 27th, and we encourage each of you to build a team to respond, and we hope to review proposals from you. So thank you for coming out and participating today.
Thank
Thanks, Maya.
you.
Thanks, Ed.
Thanks.
Daniel,